So recently I've been making a lot of videos about the American dream, or rather the illusion of the American dream. This idea that anybody can go to America and make anything of themselves. While it is true, in theory, that anybody can go to a country like America, especially coming from a place like Thailand, where I'm filming this video right now, anyone can go to America and make anything of themselves. I personally believe from my own experience that it's much easier to do this in Europe. Why is that the case? Well, the reason is simple. There is less friction in terms of upward mobility, and you have a much stronger social safety net if you fall. If you're an entrepreneur, then you know that the vast majority of your journey as an entrepreneur is getting hit in the face and just taking it, just learning to fail over and over and over again. In America, a lot of people who experience those failures never recover from them. They're never able to recover because they don't have that social safety net in place to catch them when they inevitably fall off of that tightrope. Whereas in Europe, those safety nets are there. So there's a lot less risk, but then the upside, the potential reward, is pretty much the exact same. I think this is another big misconception that some Americans have about Europe, is that you can't progress as far or get as high up in terms of the societal hierarchy. But that's simply not true. When you look at places like Monaco, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, there are people there who are absolutely loaded. Which begs the question, why do we still talk about the American dream? Why are people still unaware of how possible it is and how much easier it is to progress to wealth, to true wealth, in a lot of European countries? Well, unfortunately, I don't yet have the answer to that question. However, this person right here, Harold Aya, I don't know if I said his name correctly, but this person right here probably does. That said, let's go ahead and get into this reaction.
Where in the world is it easiest to get rich? That's the question I asked my professor when I studied sociology in the early 90s, because he was having a lecture about social democracy, Scandinavian welfare state, and he was a classical left-wing sociology professor, and he could not hide his enthusiasm when he talked about these egalitarian societies with no rich people and no poor people. But I, on the other hand, I was writing my master thesis about rich people. So when I interviewed my informants from the upper classes, they all said the same thing. Life in Scandinavia is tough. We have to work twice as hard to earn money because we have to struggle against high taxes, strong unions controlling the wages, and a generous welfare state that makes people lazy.
That's a very interesting perspective that I think a lot of Americans, especially, of course, the right-leaning conservative Americans have, is this idea that these are bad things, that high taxes, strong unions, and generous welfare are bad things because they make people lazy and disincentivize people from progressing. But the reality is the majority of people who are focused on progressing so that they can become rich are not actually looking to get rich in and of itself. They're looking to get rich so that they can find security. They're really looking for security, which again, people in Europe already have. Even if they're not rich, they already have security because of these things that you see right here. So to me, this is one of the biggest paradoxes, is that Americans want to work twice as hard so that they can live the same kinds of lifestyles as your average European. Again, American dream. You have to be asleep in order to believe it.
As one rich guy told me, he said, they call it a social security net. Well, I call it a hammock. And as every aspiring social scientist, I had starting to go native. I started to feel sympathy for these rich people. And that's why I raised my hand and asked my professor, well, what if you don't care so much about equality? What if your dream is to become rich? Where in the world should I have been born to become really rich? I still remember the puzzled look on my professor's face. But he answered the best he could, something like, well, if that's your goal in life, you should probably have been born in a society with free markets, low taxes, and minimal government intervention. And he added, if you want to become rich, you should probably not study sociology.
It's pretty interesting that he says that because, look, I've been in Thailand for, I think, 2.5 days as I filmed this video. And something I've observed, having been here for such a limited time, is that the wealth disparity is absolutely astronomical. The wealth disparity is insane. It's literally only rivaled by what I've seen in LA when you look at places like Beverly Hills compared to Skid Row. And it might even exceed that. I mean, some of the houses that I've seen in this area rival anything I've seen in Europe or the US, but the conditions surrounding these houses or these neighborhoods are absolutely abysmal. And it kind of makes me wonder, why do people want to have more than their peers? Because I think there is the group of people who I mentioned earlier who want to be rich for security's sake, because they want to ensure that they don't have to worry about if one of their family members or if they themselves get cancer or break a bone or something like that. And they don't want to have to choose between retirement and sending their kids to college without making them take out all of these student loans. But then there's the other group who just want to be rich relative to those around them. In other words, they just want to have more than everyone else. I used to be one of those people, and I don't know exactly when the transition occurred. Maybe it was when I went to Europe, but I kind of realized there is no point in being one of those kinds of people and having that sort of approach to life. If I'm living a truly wealthy life, then my life is generally devoid of comparison in the sense that I don't feel the need to have more than everyone else. I can simply focus on having enough in my own life, focus on falling more into that first group who focuses on achieving security for myself and my loved ones, and just leave it at that. And again, if that's the goal, Europe is the place to be, which I'm sure he will confirm throughout this video.
And that was a good answer, and the best guess we had back then. That is, until I saw that the University of Oslo professor in economy, Kalle Moene, actually had checked the facts. Where in the world it's easiest to get rich? And before I share with you where you should go to earn money, we have to define rich. The UN talks about the poverty line. You know, if you earn less than $1 a day, maybe $2 a day, but we have to define the richness line. It's a more fun line, actually. And the most reliable report when it comes to rich people, the Wealth Report, they set the richness line at individuals with net worth more than 30 million US dollars. And in the consultant jargon, these people are called UHNWIs. That is ultra high net worth individuals. That guy, by the way, he's not rich, he's just a model.
I'm not gonna lie, 30 million net worth is a lot of money. I feel like, honestly, if you have a net worth of maybe 2 million, maybe 2 to 3 million, I would say you're rich. Personally, I would consider you to be a rich person, or rather a wealthy person, because wealth is more about your assets, whereas being rich is more about your income. So I would say 2 to 3 million net worth is wealthy. And to be rich, I would say around 30 to 40,000 a month. 30 to 40,000 a month, and I would call you rich. You can have most of the material pleasures you want in life. But again, I don't know where they got that number from, especially if poverty is living on $2 a day. That's a very big discrepancy.
Actually, on the lower part of the model. Part. And I saved some money by keeping the watermark there as well. Smart. So, according to the Wealth Report, there are more than 170,000 UHNWIs in the world. And here's the top 5 list of countries with the most rich people. Number 5, China, with more than 8,000, UK, Germany, Japan, and on top, of course, United States with more than...
Not to cut you off there, but I'm surprised that Germany has more than the UK. I honestly thought the UK would have been number 2, or maybe number 3. But I don't know, maybe I underestimated Germany. Maybe I need to go out there and see what that's all about. But I guess to be fair, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong here, Germany does have a much larger population than the UK. Again, I could be wrong about that, but I guess that would justify it.
With more than 40,000 rich people. But of course, we're not interested in the absolute numbers here. We are interested in rich people per capita, per million inhabitants. And if we leave out the pure tax havens, like Cyprus and Switzerland, Hong Kong, Singapore, Monaco, who have an artificially huge share of rich people, it turns out that we have on number 5 Denmark, with 179 rich people per million inhabitants, Canada, New Zealand, Sweden, and on top, Norway.
That's an interesting list right there. That's a very, very interesting list. It is interesting that he completely disregarded the quote-unquote tax havens, because I feel like, and I say this a lot, but if I was just astronomically rich, if I did have a $30 million net worth, I wouldn't want to live in the US. Me personally, I would want to live in Switzerland or probably anywhere in that part of Europe, anywhere from Switzerland to maybe Monaco, somewhere like that. But I don't know why people who have that much money would want to live in a place like America, because even if it's tax advantageous, they also have that same benefit in other places, including places in Europe, like, for example, Switzerland. But you have Norway at number 1, Sweden at number 2.
But where's the US? On place 13. So what happened to my old professors, social democracies? There are no rich people there. But okay, $30 million, that's just pocket money in a country like the US, where people can get insanely rich. Look at the watermark again. So let's rise the richness line up from $30 million up to $1 billion.
It's a big jump.
And the most reliable source here is the Forbes billionaires list. And according to the Forbes, if we look at billionaires per million inhabitants, on number 5, Germany, 1.2 million billionaires. No, 1.2 billionaires per million inhabitants. United States, 1.7, Norway, 2, Sweden, and on top, Iceland with 3.1.
Would not have expected Iceland to be there, but we see Germany's there again. So this is per million inhabitants, so it's taking into account the population. So that's interesting. I didn't really know that about Germany. I didn't know that Germany had that kind of wealth within that country. So that's another country that I really, really want to visit. Next time I'm in Europe, I'll definitely try to get out there.
with a single billionaire, Thor Björgolfsson. He could have been a model. So, but the point is, United States, 1.7, Scandinavia taken as a whole, 2.1, and the big mystery is, how can this be? How can Bernie Sanders' dream societies, these socialist paradises, be such a breeding place for rich people? That's a mystery. And there are two reasons. Reason number one is free education. Social democracies give free higher education to everybody, and cheap student loans and grants, and that enables more people to use their talents and earn money.
This is exactly what I was talking about in one of my recent videos. I think it was 3 American Lies I No Longer Believe After Living in Europe, or something like that. That's exactly what I was talking about in that video. If you haven't watched the video, go ahead and check it out after this one. But basically, when you make college that expensive, you end up having people spending their entire working careers just trying to dig themselves, or rather climb out of a hole that they've dug themselves into at the age of 18. It doesn't make any sense at all to me, and personally, I don't really see the incentive for going to college, hence why I dropped out. Unless you're literally going to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or something else that puts you in the top, let's say 5% of earners, I don't see how you can justify paying those kinds of student loans. Whereas in a lot of Europe, even when you do have to pay for college, I know in the Netherlands college isn't free, it's so cheap that the price is pretty much negligible. And even though the average wages are lower, you come out ahead because you don't have to pay off all of these student loans. These are the things you have to think about when thinking about the higher income that the US provides. There's always a hidden cost associated with it.
We can see this in the social mobility numbers. Imagine all fathers in a society, and we divide them into 5 groups based on income, from the bottom fifth up to the top fifth. And then we look at their sons, and then divide their income into 5 steps. And we see how many sons of the fathers from the bottom income end up on top. How many sons goes from rags to riches? If it was perfect social mobility, if talents and opportunities were equally distributed, 20% from the bottom would end up on each of these 5 ladders. So let's look at the numbers for the different countries. In Denmark, they're pretty close to perfect social mobility, with 14% goes from rags to riches. In Norway, it's 12, Sweden, 11, United States, 8. Because of free education, there are more self-made men in Scandinavia than in the US. And if we look at those sons who don't end up on top, but stay on the bottom, who goes from rags to rags.
I'm sorry, I know I keep pausing the video. I'm getting mad all over again just seeing this. Honestly, it doesn't make any sense that college is as expensive as it is. It literally makes no sense to me, and I've seen Americans try to justify these prices without understanding that pretty much no other developed nation other than maybe Canada, I don't really know if it's true or not, but at least no other developed nation in Europe that I'm aware of is charging that much money for college. Just for reference, if you go to Harvard, and of course that's literally the top of the line college, you're going to pay around $80,000 per year. $80,000 a year to get a bachelor's degree. If you go to the University of Texas at Austin, which is the school that I was planning on going to before I went to community college to save money and then ultimately dropped out, if you're from the state of Texas, you'll be paying $25,000 a year, assuming you live on campus. If you're not from Texas, if you're from, let's say, California, and you go to the University of Texas at Austin, you pay the out-of-state tuition, you're coming out of pocket for around $40,000 to $45,000 per year. You can fact check this for yourself. Absolutely ridiculous. Just plain exploitative, honestly.
Again, 20% would be perfect mobility. In Denmark, 25% ends up on the bottom. Sweden, a bit more. Norway, look United States. This is because education in the United States is very expensive. But the second and most important explanation for Scandinavia being such a breeding place for rich people is this. Have you ever noticed, if you've been to the United States, when you drive around and you drive through a toll plaza, there's actually people sitting there taking your money?
I do know about that. And as a matter of fact, if you followed my van life journey, I just want to give you a little update. I ended up getting a $110, I think, $115 ticket from the New Jersey Toll Road Association, whatever it's called. Granted, I ended up not having to pay it because I found a little loophole, but I know all about that. I am getting mad all over again. This video is getting me worked up, honestly. Let's just keep watching.
Compare that to my local toll plaza. Just a sign with some gizmo attached to it. And when you go to a supermarket,
I just remembered, Norway doesn't use euros, do they? They don't use euros. They use this, whatever this means. I don't know what that means, but I forgot about that. So Norway isn't even a part of the EU, is it? Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
supermarket in the United States, there are actually people there helping to pack your things into your bags. It's very friendly and convenient compared to my local grocery store. It's like this. There's nobody there. The biggest shock I had when I went to the US for the first time, when I went to the restroom, there are actually people working there. Compare that to my local public toilet. There's not even a cleaner there. It cleans itself automatically. And the reason for this difference is that Scandinavian unions are pressing up the minimum wages. So it's so expensive to have these people working there. In Norway, a toll booth operator, supermarket packer, and a restroom janitor would earn almost 3 as much as in the US. And that's why we have replaced these people with machines.
3 times as much as the US. So I'm assuming he's going based on the lowest minimum wage, like Texas has, for example, which is $7.25 an hour. So you're looking at around 21 an hour minimum wage. That is very, very nice. That's very nice. But then I have to wonder how that affects the job market for teenagers who are looking for some pocket change to go to the movies or just hang out with their friends, do whatever. I have to wonder how that affects their job market because, I mean, most of the time, people aren't going to want to hire 16 or 17-year-olds at $20 an hour unless they're producing very, very exceptional results for their age. So if you know more about that, then definitely provide some insight in the comments, if you will.
And that is why I was surprised when I saw this article in the New York Times in 2014, preparing for chip and PIN cards in the United States. Because in the United States, people are still using paper checks as a method of payment, while Scandinavian banks have made us start using chip and PIN cards long ago. Because the minimal wages here are so high, so Scandinavian banks can't afford having people manually controlling the checks. So Scandinavian companies, because of the unions pressing up the wages, they have to downsize and introduce new technology, or else they will go broke. And new technology increases the productivity in a society, which in the long run also increases profit.
This is very, very true. Very true. That's something that I didn't really consider. I never really looked at it like that. But that's super, super true. Just as an entrepreneur, ultimately, when you're not able to employ as many people, you have to find more efficient ways of doing things. You have to learn to systemize things. And this ultimately makes your business much more profitable in the long run. That's very fascinating.
And on the upper end of the wage ladder, in the name of solidarity, Scandinavian unions hold back the highest salaries of the skilled workers. So, for example, a Norwegian senior engineer, he's my uncle, by the way. That's why there's no watermark there. Actually, he would look cooler with a watermark, but he earns on average per year $76,000, while his American colleague earns more than $100,000. So, American engineers, they are not only more good looking, but they are more expensive. So, of course, this wage restraint on high-skilled work, it's good for profit. So the unions are in effect subsidizing the capitalists.
Wait, hold on. He just blew my mind with that one. I guess, to my point earlier, he's speaking more from the standpoint of entrepreneurs. As an entrepreneur, I can see how that would make it much easier to accumulate wealth. But as a worker, it would probably make things more difficult. But then again, because the workers aren't having to go and spend $80,000 or $40,000 or whatever it is per year to obtain a degree to get that kind of job, even though they make less money, they still come away better in the long run, especially when you consider not having to pay as much for health insurance and things of that nature, or not needing to own a car, not needing to pay as much for groceries, all of that. The overall lower cost of living that most of Europe provides. So it's beneficial for everyone involved, for the workers and for the people employing the workers. So that does make a lot of sense. And I think a lot more people need to see this video.
I wish I knew all this when I gave up a career in social science, because the beauty and the irony of this finding, I think it's amazing. On the one hand, you have my rich informants that complained about how hard it is to get rich in Scandinavia, and they had it all wrong. Not only is it easier to get rich in a social democracy, but they are critical to the very institutions that have helped them getting rich. High taxes, which gives free education and more talent into the economy. Strong unions that are helping increasing the productivity.
I just thought about something. So really, as an entrepreneur, if you're paying higher taxes, you're essentially reinvesting back into your business in a sense, because you paying the higher taxes ensures that the employees don't need to have the high student loans, which means they don't need to make as much, which means you get to keep more of your profit. So if more business owners, especially in America and other places like America, viewed taxes in that way as an investment in their businesses, then I'm sure they would change their tune about avoiding paying taxes. Or maybe I'm just an idealist.
And a generous welfare state that make the unions accept downsizing because they know that their members will be well taken care of, so the unions cooperate because of the safety net. So rich people are a bit like Immanuel Kant's famous bird, who thinks she could fly even faster in airless space, forgetting that it's the air itself that gives her lift. And on the other part of the political spectrum, when Bernie Sanders is praising Scandinavian societies, he forgets that these are not anti-rich or anti-capitalist systems, because the welfare state and unions work in tandem with capitalist dynamics. And I think that is the most important lesson here. The economy is not a zero-sum game. We're in this together. And that is why Scandinavia is a better place to fulfill the American dream than America itself. Thank you so much.
That's a perfect outro right there. Scandinavia, and I would actually extend this to most of Western Europe, and maybe even Eastern Europe. I'm not as informed on Eastern Europe, if you can't tell from my videos, but really most of Europe, we'll just say most of Europe, is a better place to fulfill the American dream than the US itself. The US is smoke and mirrors, I'm telling you.